Second, we'll be talking about the MISO SPP dispute. Third, we'll be talking about the Swpp real-time volatility study. Fourth, we'll be talking about the MISO SPP interface congestion drivers. And lastly, we'll be looking at how Genscape Power IQ market intelligence services could help to better predict the Swpp pricing in the real time in the day ahead. So the first section, we'll be looking at the Swpp interface definition and what is Swpp. So MISO interface price definition is derived from all the external generator bus prices for a specific balancing area. And the MISO SPP interface is the average LMP of about 630 SPP generator buses. Now, the current methodology is not flawless. It currently can result in an overstatement of payments or charge to external transactions. And that's part of the something that MISO and SPP are currently working on. They are working to implement the IMM's proposed solution to exclude congestion on the external market-to-market constraints from the interface price. And this was discussed in the fall in September this year. Here is we included a table for the Swpp interface nodes, interface hubs, load zones, and gen nodes. And also we included a map for the SPP. Now we're going to talk about the second section, which is the Swpp real-time volatility study. So here we look at the real-time hub daily average LMP spreads of Indy versus Swpp, Louisiana hub versus Swpp, Arkansas hub versus Swpp. And what we found was that the correlation between Swpp and Indy is 63%. Swpp and Louisiana is negative 10%. Arkansas hub versus Swpp is 38%. So based on the correlation, we can conclude that the correlation is weak based on the outliers within the data set. For example, the Indy Swpp spread outliers were mostly attributed to bullish Indiana congestion, for example, around the Newton to Robinson area, or the Orca interface congestion, which we typically see in the real time. Second, for Louisiana Swpp spread, the outliers were mostly attributed to Addis to Tiger. And lastly, we look at the Arkansas hub versus Swpp spread. And the big were identified for the SOCO versus Swpp outliers. We also looked at the SPP North, SPP South hub versus the Swpp daily average LMP. And the correlation was 38% for the SPP North versus Swpp, and 17% for the Swpp South hub versus Swpp. Again, the correlation is weak between SPP North hub, South hub, and Swpp. In addition to the hub spread that we ran earlier, we also study the real-time SPP interface flow, the real-time MISO wind generation, real-time SPP generation, and Swpp real-time LMP. And here, in terms of the interface flow, the negative will be indicate a import into SPP, while the positive indicate the export out of the SPP. And the real correlation between the MISO wind, in this chart, we look at the MISO wind interface flow in SPP and the Swpp real-time LMP. And what we found, the correlation is only negative 15% in between the MISO wind and Swpp, indicating the reverse relationship between MISO wind generation and Swpp real-time LMP. The correlation between the SPP aggregate interface flow to Swpp is only 23%, indicating that the higher the SPP price is, the greater the export is from SPP region. Following that, let's look at the Swpp correlation with the SPP wind generation and the aggregate SPP power flows. So again, what we found was the correlation between SPP wind generation and Swpp real-time LMP is only negative 1.5%. But this could indicate that a reverse relationship between the wind production in SPP region and Swpp real-time LMP. The last part of the volatility study, we compared the SPP wind against the MISO wind generation. Again, this is real-time wind generation. And what we found was a correlation of 45%, indicating that MISO and SPP wind move along together. We also observed very similar wind production in both MISO and SPP regions over the summer. So to summarize the volatility study section, what we learned was that there is weak correlation between Swpp and Indy, Louisiana, Arkansas hubs, also interface points such as SoCo and PGMC. On average, SPP South hub and North hub are above Swpp points, although this correlation is weak. Third, the weak correlation between SPP interface wind generation in both MISO and SPP, and the positive correlation between SPP interface flow indicate that the greater the Swpp real-time LMP is, the greater the export MISO receives from SPP region. The negative correlation between MISO SPP wind generation indicate that the stronger wind generation helps suppressing the real-time LMP for the Swpp point. So here, let's talk about the MISO and SPP dispute. So on December 19, 2013, Entergy was integrated to MISO. The flow between MISO South and MISO Classic, which is the MISO Midwest, was at 2,000 megawatts, which was part of the Operational Reliability Coordination Agreement, which is also called ORCA. However, the SPP claimed that MISO could only operate at the 1,000 megawatt physical connection. without So this chart shows that the 1,000 megawatts limit has helped limit the shadow prices and occurrences of the interface congestion after the implementation of the sub-regional power balance congestion introduction. And we can see that there is less congestion or lower occurrences since the summer. We saw a little bit more of that, more so over the winter and also over the spring. Just to kind of conclude the MISO SPP dispute, on July 17 this year, MISO introduced a hurdle rate to sub-regional power balance constraint. And this sets the initial demand curve at $9.57 per megawatt hour. Also ensured the economic benefits for intra-regional flows that are above that 1,000 megawatt threshold. So this filing established a separate sub-regional power balance constraint demand curve consisting of a single price point. The hurdle rate in addition to the demand curve to manage the flow limits. And here we also included a demand curve chart next to in the slide. So to summarize the MISO SPP dispute section, the sub-regional has a same price impact on all the self-generating units, and it has all the equal sensitivity when binding. Interfaces such as the Swpp is an exception. Therefore, when the sub-regional congestion binds, we see a prorated impact on Swpp interface MCC to the rest of the MISO South, which means that the Swpp is only a fraction of what the LMP of South has. So we're pretty much in the toward the end of the webinar, but let's look at some of the MISO SPP interface congestion drivers. I believe this is one of the most interesting part of the study. So first, let's look at the ORCA-1 interface. The ORCA interface could be either from the south to north or north to south. And for the first example, let's look at the south to north flow, which is also called the power balance congestion after the introduction of the sub-regional power balance constraint. So in this case, the driver is usually due to generation weakness. Usually we see it over the morning ramp and the evening ramp. This is due to that gen weakness over these periods in the MISO Midwest, the MISO Classic. Also, we see this being more of a concern when there is very low wind in the Midwest. The impact on Swpp is bearish on Swpp since the gen is flowing from the south into the north. Impact on the MISO hub will be bullish on Indiana, also bearish on everything in the south. Here we included a heat map that will be on the right-hand side. That's showing how the contour map or how the pricing is when this congestion hits. We also included the occurrence of the 5-minute real-time intervals, the number of times that it hits in real time versus the day ahead. And we see that It's been hitting more often in the real time versus the day ahead. Next, let's look at the reverse orca. This is the opposite of the orca. This is flowing from the north into the south. It's also named as the reverse power balance congestion after the introduction of the subregional. The driver is the opposite of the orca, is due to the morning-evening generation weakness in the MISO south. Also, we got strong wind generation in the Midwest that will be able to flow down into the south. Impact on Swpp will be bullish on the Swpp. Impact on the hubs will be bearish on the Indiana, but bullish to everything in the south. So we also see a little bit more of this in the real time. I believe we see it more often over that of the outer season. And here's also a heat map of that reverse power balance congestion. Third, the Forsmith congestion. This is sort of recent. We started to see this in October this year. So a couple drivers here. Tie line outages around Maybeville. Last time we saw it, it was around the mid of October. We had a line outage at Maybeville to Sheridan and Dale to Independence and Maybeville to Wrightsville. Also, we had a coal-fired unit remaining offline in Spp, which is, to be more exact, that's in the north and east, the north included some of the outliers that were attributing to a high correlation with Indiana and Swpp, and we are going to explain some of the outliers here just to identify some of the risks that we might be seeing. So some of the outliers that we saw on the spread were mostly attributed to these congestion in particular, and it's fair enough to say that although Swpp real time is not directly influenced by these congestion outliers, but we could usually see some widespread between hubs or hubs to the Swpp point. So I think it's good to identify some of these risks in some of the details. First, let's talk about the Newton to Robinson Freed to Wheatland congestion. This is a very classic congestion that we usually see over that morning ramp period. And the driver is usually due to generation weakness at a coal-fired unit or coal-fired plants in western Indiana, and generation strength coming from the southern part of the Illinois. The impact on the hub spread will be bullish to the Indy Swpp, and it's obviously bullish to the Indy hub. We see it across both the real-time and the day-ahead. And here we also included a heat map of one Newton to Robinson / Brick to Wheelan hit. Second, the Addis to Tiger, it's in in terms of the location, it's in the southern part of the Louisiana. We see it most often when there's a line outage at Willow Glen to Brittany. It's bullish to the Louisiana and Swpp spread. Third, let's talk about the Fancy Point transformer. And this is, in terms of locations, also around the Addis to Tiger area in the southern part of the Louisiana. The driver is also similar. It's due to the Willow Glen to Brittany line outage. It's also bullish to the Louisiana and Swpp spread, bullish to the Louisiana hub by itself. Last, let's talk about the airport to Gagey. It's also due to the same line outage, but the impact is very different. It's due to the Willow Glen to Brittany line outage. Instead of being bullish, this one is actually bearish to that Louisiana versus Swpp spread. More specifically, it's bearish to the Louisiana hub. We also included a heat map, but we weren't able to capture a great shot when this occurred in real time. Next, let's look at the Maberville transformer. I believe we talked about this earlier. This is the opposite direction of that Forsmith Congestion. Last time this hit was due to line outage at Maberville to Sheridan, which is on that the tie line. Also, we had generation strength at NO, that's the nuke in Arkansas. When this hit was bullish to Arkansas hub and therefore bullish to the Arkansas versus Swpp spread. Maberville to Bryant. This is also a similar constraint as the Maberville transformer. The line outage is Maberville to Sheridan. That's typically the driver of this constraint. Also, we have to have the gen strength coming from the ANO nuke. This is bullish to the Arkansas hub and therefore bullish to the Arkansas to Swpp spread. Lastly, the Nelson transformer is another key one that we usually encounter in both real-time and the day-ahead. The drivers are actually line or transformer outages around Cypress or generation weakness around the coal units in eastern Texas. So this is bearish to Louisiana hub, and therefore it's bearish to that Louisiana versus Swpp spread. And here's also a heat map of that Nelson transformer. So just to summarize what we just talked about, since the MISO South integration, MISO SPP flow have changed a lot. The dispute is still ongoing between MISO and SPP and will likely continue to change the market and already introduce 2 constraints to the market. Also, Swpp price does not seem to follow a distinct price point in either market, the SPP and the MISO, and don't have any strong correlation to supply in either MISO or SPP market. Also, the major constraint to watch for in terms of this interface point would be sub-regional power balance, Orca, Fort Smith, and Maberville transformer. So before we conclude, here at Genscape we have the Power IQ services, and we provide insights for the Swpp real-time versus day-ahead pricing. We usually include a 10-day rolling average of the dark spread on our next day report. In addition to that, we also include the impact on the Swpp point in the congestion write-up, which is also available for both the recap report, Val-day report, and next day report. So that will be all for today. Thank you again for joining us today for the Swpp webinar, and we'll be collecting some questions, and we'll be back shortly. Thank you.
All right, thank you again, Stanley. First question we have up is whether or not the 633 gen node calculations that she mentioned earlier were based off of the SPP calculations or based off of a MISO calculation engine. So Stanley?
That's based on the MISO calculation. So it's I believe it's a equally weighted average of all the 630 gen nodes in the interface.
Okay, so second question we have is with regards to seasonality and the direction of the flow. So is there any kind of seasonal pattern that we see for the congestion flowing from MISO south into north and north into south?
So what we typically find out was that in the winter when there's more heating load in the Midwest, then we tend to get a little bit more of that south to north, which is also the power balance congestion that's moving generally from the south into the north. Toward the summer, toward the spring, fall season, we can see more of that north to south, just based on how wind is behaving seasonally. You get a little bit more wind during these seasons, then you get to see more of that north to south flow, which is the reverse power balance congestion that we mentioned earlier.
Next up, we're looking at whether the price increase on the Swpp interface place means that we see more or less flows from Swpp into MISO.
So with that higher price over the Swpp point, what we expect to see is that MISO is probably going to be importing generation from SPP, which means SPP will be exporting gen into MISO.
The next question we had was related to what unit that Stanley specifically referenced when we were talking about that Forsmith transformer congestion?
So that was based on the Genscape's coverage of the Muskogee unit in western Oklahoma. Genscape also monitors the real-time flows around the Forsmith area, which helps us to predict the timing and direction of these flows.
Okay, so one last question that we have here is the kind of competition between the sub-regional power balance constraint and ORCA, and the kind of belief that once the sub-regional power balance came in, we would no longer see ORCA congestion.
So I would refer back to the demand curve section. That's the last slide of the MISO SPP dispute. So just to summarize that, we tend not to see too much of the ORCA congestion. We have started to see more of that sub-regional power balance. But I believe if there is more than 130% of the gen that's violating that limit, then you might be seeing ORCA, which is priced at a more expensive price point. So I believe last week over the Saturday or Sunday, we saw the ORCA that was in place in the real time was hitting for a couple of intervals in combination of the sub-regional power balance. I believe there was severe generation weakness in the system. So you could see it, but you really need to take a lot for that to bind in the real time.
Okay, and just to follow up from our question earlier, when we're looking at that Swpp interface price, we are kind of taking that in conjunction with the MISO interface price and SPP. So the question is, if the Swpp price is cheaper than the MISO interface price and SPP, which way do we expect to see flows go?
We will likely to see more gen from MISO into SPP instead of SPP into MISO.
We had one question about the expectations for this upcoming winter and the impacts of the potential for polar vortex 2.0. What we're looking at there, I think, is a lot to do with our upcoming MISO winter outlook that Stanley will be presenting later. But with kind of looking at those flows, again, as she stated earlier, as we're getting into colder temperatures in the Midwest relative to what's happening in the South, you'll see more of that south to north push and the reverse congestion coming in. We have one or two more questions here, but we'll go back to those individuals with a little bit more of an explicit and kind of detailed answer. So we've definitely got your information here, and we'll get back to you in a little bit. But that was really all we had time for this afternoon. Again, thank you, Stanley, for presenting and taking the time to join us this afternoon.